Hey folks, today's show is brought to you by Fanly, the sports app you've been waiting for. Fanly delivers news about your favorite teams from over 2,000 top sources, including news, video, tweets, and more. Its design is great, its information makes you a smarter fan, and it's as free can be. Download it now for Apple and Android for free. That's Fanly, Fanly. Now let's get to the show.
It's the Harris Football Podcast with your host, Christopher Harris.
Okay, let's do this. Hey, I am Chris Harris. This is the Harris Football Podcast. Thank you very much for listening. First thing I have to say today is, happy birthday, Dad. Hey, it's my dad's birthday, August 27th. And I know he listens to every show. I love you, Pop. Now, I'm probably never getting my dad to actually play in a fantasy league. He loves football, but he's pretty skeptical about fantasy, except for a career for his son. But how cool and supportive is a dad who doesn't really care about fantasy, but every day he still listens to the little podcast that could? Thank you, Dad. There were some technical issues with yesterday's show, some kind of disconnect between our hosting company and places like the iTunes Store and Stitcher, which meant yesterday's episode, which was Busts for 2015 with Mike Clay aboard as a guest, did not show at the top of the list of episodes in those places. It was a frustrating night. Eventually, someone more technical than myself got things resolved. But the thing I wanted to say is, subscribers did not have this problem. If you were frustrated yesterday that you couldn't get the Harris Football Podcast because it wasn't showing up on iTunes or Stitcher or any place else where you get podcasts, if you subscribe, that will never happen again. Every episode will be delivered automatically to you. I'm an iTunes guy, so I know this. You launch the iTunes Store, you find the Harris Football Podcast, and you click subscribe, and that's it. You'll never miss a show. Stitcher, you add the show to your playlist. That's how you get shows delivered automatically there. Anyway, sorry to spend so much time on this, but there were many, many questions on Twitter yesterday, and honestly, if you want to help the little podcast that could and give a birthday present to my dad, and how manipulative is it that I just said that, subscribing is the absolute best way.
Today's kickoff.
This is the part of the show where I tell you what we're going to do in today's show. It's the beginning of a two-parter. It's time to go super deep. Folks who've been fans of my work at ESPN know that for 7 straight years I wrote a column called Super Deep Sleepers and isolated some relative unknowns that might wind up being contributors at some point. So today I'm going to give the first 5 on this year's list. Tomorrow, the second 5. Of course, your insane voicemails will rear their heads, as well as a mailbag with tweets and emails. And then Evan Silva of Rotoworld and the Fantasy Feast podcast will be on to give some more ideas for super deep sleepers and basically to class up the place because Evan is great. Since DraftKings became a sponsor of the podcast, we've gotten a bunch of emails about daily fantasy sports, asking about my personal DFS habits on DraftKings. As I've mentioned, I am, in fact, a proud DraftKings.com member, and people have wanted to know which contests I like best. I definitely do sometimes play in the Millionaire Makers, and I'll definitely be playing in the big pool week 1 this year, where the first prize is $2 million, and the second prize is $1 million. Obviously, I'm still doing this show, so I haven't won the big money just yet. I also really like the 50-50 games, and those are the ones I've played the most, and I've made a little bit of scratch. Basically, you enter the pool, and the top half of finishers double their money. Doesn't matter if you finish first or the very last person in the top half. You double your money. I love those because I feel like a little expertise gives me an advantage. I can't recommend DraftKings more highly as a way to make Sundays just a little more exciting. If you go to DraftKings.com and use promo code Harris, you get a free entry and you help the little podcast that could. And I really recommend it. DraftKings.com, promo code HARRIS. So something I used to do for the Worldwide Leader that a lot of folks liked were my couch videos. Couch videos, no, I made that sound creepy. I mean the player videos that I did from my couch here at home. And I'm still doing them this year. Just yesterday, we uploaded some videos where I talk for, 90 seconds about the Lions running backs, the Packers and Panthers receivers, Cam Newton, Rashad Jennings, Andre Johnson. There's a lot of other players up there too. Anyway, it's a little extra way to get some details about players who might be in the news and my opinions of them, so I hope you'll dig those. You can find them at harrisfootball.com. But I brought it up because one item of note in that group is that the Packers' third receiver job still appears to be up for grabs. I mentioned it in yesterday's show. It's shaping up to be kind of an important battle. And the winner is probably going to be fantasy relevant in a lot of leagues. It's Jeff Janis, who was a super deep sleeper of mine last year as a rookie, against Ty Montgomery, who's a rookie this year. So I'll say this about that battle. I think Janis is a faster player, and that would probably correspond more closely with Jordy Nelson's skills. If Janis could be more consistent with his route running and with his, what do they call it, ball skills, like, catching the ball, I would view him as a potential breakout guy. But the fact that a fairly unpolished rookie like Montgomery is apparently pushing Janis makes me think Janis isn't quite ready, or at least, might not be quite ready. Montgomery, gadget guy at Stanford. He was really productive, but he played some receiver. He actually played quite a bit of running back. He was a great return guy. Mostly what he is a terrific athlete. He's definitely one of those spark guys that draftniks talk about. And for that reason alone, if he's challenging to be Aaron Rodgers' number 3, we should know his name. Anyway, for fantasy, I think I'd be more excited if Janis can win the job. Faster and, not least because he's been through an NFL season. But, I think maybe more importantly, there's potential for deep touchdowns there that maybe there wouldn't be for a guy like Montgomery, who might be more of an analog for someone like Randall Cobb, although he's bigger. Anyway, neither of these guys is now a deep enough sleeper to make today's list, but definitely worth monitoring in all leagues. You heard off the top that today's show is also brought to you by Fanly. And again, I should emphasize how grateful we are for our sponsors, and you should be too because they keep the show free. Fanly, that's the best thing to happen in sports apps in a while because unlike the big media sites who try and get into the app game, but they just mess it up with slow-loading, clunky apps, Fanly is sleek and fast and delivers a ton of information elegantly. I use it for my iPhone, but it's available for Android too, and I really do check it out every day, multiple times a day. If you've become a Fanly convert like I have, first of all, that's awesome, thank you, and also spread the word. By now, Fanly is kind of like a close cousin of the little podcast that could, and we're totally psyched that they're taking on the big guys with a product that's just better. Anyone you know who's super into sports would love Fanly, so tell them to download. That's Fanly, Fanly, a free download. Get it today. So it is the 8th straight year I've produced a super deep sleeper list, and I've hit on some pretty good names over the years. I know Arian Foster was on the list many moons ago. Over the past few seasons, 2012, I had Jordan Cameron and Mohamed Sanu. 2013, Andre Ellington and Jonas Gray before he was with the Patriots, when he was still with the Dolphins. 2014 was a pretty darn good year. Alfred Blue, John Brown, Charles Johnson when he was still with the Browns, Jerick McKinnon, and Dante Moncrief. They were all on the list. Clearly, though, there were also lots of names that never amounted to anything, because what this list is super deep, as in most of the guys are unknown to even major NFL fans, and barring an injury among starters and maybe injuries among backups, they aren't going to contribute this year. But the idea here is we're looking to get smarter. I'm giving you names, you probably shouldn't draft, at least outside a deep dynasty league, but I want to alert you to these guys, because if things do break right for them and their names start to get thrown around as possible producers at some point during the year, you'll remember them, your league mates won't know them, and you'll be ready to pounce quicker. And of course, dynasty players, yeah, I mean, all of these guys are, should be on your radar screen for the future. Oh, and on Twitter, folks suggested guys like Cameron Artis-Payne and David Johnson, Matt Jones, Devontae Parker, Tyler Eifert. Those are way not deep enough. Those guys are all going to wind up being owned in 12-team leagues. I'm going a lot deeper here, so I'm going to give you these guys in alphabetical order, 5 today, 5 tomorrow. I'm going to get started with Derek Carrier, a tight end in Washington. If you listened to Tuesday's show, you heard Brandon Funston, of Yahoo Fantasy, steal a little bit of my thunder on Derek Carrier. He mentioned him as a lottery ticket. It's a good call by Brandon. I think maybe he's a little deeper than just a lottery ticket, maybe not necessarily draftable right now in 12-team leagues. But Washington just traded for Carrier after they lost both Niles Paul and Logan Paulson for the season. Now, all that stands between Carrier and some significant snaps is Jordan Reed's health. In other words, Jordan Reed will inevitably get hurt. In fact, I think he's battled hamstring troubles already in camp, and Carrier will wind up getting some run. Converted wide receiver, runs a 4.49 at 240 pounds. He was a reserve with the 49ers for the past 2 years, so he has some experience with the NFL grind. It's worth questioning how much any ancillary weapon is worth in D.C. if Washington can't get RG3 or someone at quarterback playing well consistently. So that's why I'm saying Carrier's probably not someone you need to draft in most leagues right now, but keep his free agency status in your league on speed dial, because he could be a streamable guy fairly soon. Next up on my list is Steelers rookie receiver Sammy Coates. Now, I talked about Ty Montgomery earlier, fighting for the number 3 job with the Packers, and Coates and Montgomery, for me, kind of belonged in the same kind of athletic class in the draft. Maybe they're going to be really good football players, but maybe they're not quite there yet. They're better athletes than they are football players right now, but Coates is an even better athlete than Montgomery. He's like a 99th percentile spark guy. He's got that zero inertia explosiveness that, the draft community talks about. Steelers don't currently have an opening with their receiving core. Antonio Brown, Martavis Bryant, Marcus Wheaton, they're all secure. But Coates certainly should beat out Darius Hayward-Bay to be number 4. And that would be, interesting. He came out of Auburn with a reputation for stone hands and already showed those stone hands in Steelers, preseason work. Possible he's never able to overcome that, basic catching problems, but athletes like this don't come along very often, and if someone in that Pittsburgh receiving core gets hurt, I know I will be paying attention to Coates. Third on today's list, again, these are in alphabetical order, is Jonathan Grimes, running back for the Texans. 4th-year guy out of William & Mary. I think he's just big enough to handle a workload if things were ever to break right for him. And if you were going to give me a choice between him and Alfred Blue, I know Blue's bigger, and I know he is the presumptive starter with no Arian Foster in Houston, but if you were just going to give me a team where I could pick one of them, I think I might take Grimes. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe he's just another guy, but I went back and watched every carry he's had in the NFL regular season over his career, and I should say it's only 62 carries, so I'm not some kind of hero for watching them. I see a pretty good runner. He doesn't seem like he threatens with a ton of long speed, but a really hard cutter, someone who makes multiple defenders miss on some runs with quickness. It seems like he's no better than 3rd on the depth chart if Arian Foster comes back, because Blue is in the way. And then also we've heard a lot about Chris Polk. There's some obvious lottery ticket appeal with Polk. Polk is actually getting selected in 12-team leagues, and rightly so. I'm okay with him as a lottery ticket. But going a little deeper, I've got my eye on Grimes. I think he might be the best of the bunch behind Foster in terms of skills. Obviously, the Texans see him more in practice every day than I'm ever going to see him. But from what he's laid down on tape, I am intrigued. Next up, another wideout. A non-rookie, Josh Huff for the Eagles. I was talking busts with Mike Clay of Pro Football Focus on Wednesday's show, and he brought up Nelson Aguilar. Not as a player he, objectively hates, but as someone he thinks is being overdrafted. And Mike brought up Josh Huff, and I think rightly so. Huff is an okay athlete. He's not a big receiver. If I was gonna pick Philly's top outside guy based on speed alone, I would go with Aguilar. But otherwise, in terms of, route running and short area burst, it's probably about a wash between Huff and Aguilar, which is to say, these guys are kind of a type. They are sort of similar players. And as Mike said yesterday, it would be absolutely no surprise to see Chip Kelly treat his outside receivers as like a rotation. Just keep running them in and out of there. Huff isn't even being drafted in super deep leagues right now, and I'm probably okay with that. He had some hands problems as a rookie last year. Riley Cooper and Miles Austin are still in Philly and still likely to jump into that rotation too. But I'll say when it comes to Huff, if someone gets hurt or if he winds up, those first couple of weeks, he kind of pokes his head out in front of those other guys production-wise, I think I'm going to be more willing to believe and bite rather than just regard him as a total sort of fluke one-week wonder. And our last name for today, again, we're going to do another 5 guys tomorrow, is the Super Bowl unknown, the guy who got a touchdown, 4 catches, over 100 yards in the Super Bowl last year, Chris Matthews of Seattle. I know it's the Seahawks, and they don't really ever seem to produce fantasy-relevant wideouts. Plus, now they've added Jimmy Graham, who is by far their most valuable target that Russell Wilson is going to have. And Matthews is dealing with an injured shoulder in training camp and basically isn't playing. But I think it's unwise to completely discount the possibility that Matthews' production in the Super Bowl was for real. Okay, so at 6'5", he's got awesome size, but is decidedly not one of those ridiculous specimens who runs like a gazelle despite, 220 pounds. He's not Julio Jones. He's not A.J. Green. He'll never be that because it's just not athletically what he has. But what he has, I think, is different for Seattle out wide. They've got a bunch of Smurfs. They've got Doug Baldwin, who's really small, Jermaine Kearse, who's not small, but he's certainly not 6'5". And I think Matthews has some box-out ability, some potential touchdown-making ability that is unique to the Seattle receiving corps. He's a legit giant. He might not be a freak athlete, but he's really, really big. And so can I imagine a scenario where Seattle decides, all right, we need to have that light pole on the outside who threatens teams in the red zone, and I can imagine that scenario. So, again, not drafting Matthews, but not totally discounting the idea that the Super Bowl was a legit breakout.
Time for the mailbag.
So I'm in an electronics store just now, and over my shoulder I hear some guy yelling at this poor lady working at the register. And I look, and there is Christopher Harris yelling while waving around his copy of Madden Football, and he's screaming about Joik Bell's rating needing to be 10 points higher. Chris, this poor girl does not determine the ratings for Madden. You shouldn't have done that. I'm very ashamed of you.
This is Bobby in Denver, Colorado, leaving this message to report that as I was getting out of my little car that could, I noticed the line at my local dispensary. Well, none too pleased because I was under the gun. However, my mood changed when I spotted Chris Harris in line playing Angry Birds on his phone. Well, gotta go. It's 4:20 Mountain Time, the forgotten time zone. Have a good one.
Hey, I'm driving through the middle of nowhere bayou country of Louisiana, and I could have sworn I just saw Chris Harris riding slowly and menacingly on a riding lawnmower. Chris, are you the Yellow King?
Carcosa, baby. Oh, True Detective Season 1. We never realized we had it so good until we saw True Detective Season 2. Those voicemails are piling up. I have to play more than one of them a day or we'll never, ever get through them. You can call with your Christopher Harris sighting, 786-529-2484, which you don't need to know because on your keypad it spells out Sunk by a Hug. Sunk by a Hug is the quasi-official motto of the Harris Football Podcast. So here we go with a couple of tweets, and then we'll get to Evan Silva. We've got at CH Scuttlebutt. We have a new novelty account, podcast-themed. Says, I'm here now for all the news and sightings of the amorphous Christopher Harris. That's at CH Scuttlebutt, another novelty account to follow. And I got several emails from kind listeners and tweets saying that they now have officially lost track of all of the accounts that are related to the show for Twitter, and I have too, which is why I'm going to take you all up on your suggestions, and I'm going to have someone make a page on the website just devoted to the novelty accounts that you should be following. You can add at CH Scuttlebutt to that group. Of course, we've got Gurley's Knee, What a Trash Bag, Amber's Drops, Crutch Argument. I'm probably missing some. If I am, tweet them to me and let me know. And then we've got one final tweet here from our old buddy, Timmy Spicy Wiener, at Harris Football. Hey, I dropped Joik Bell in a total panic move. I need constant reassurance in podcast form. Timmy, I'm not sure I can give it to you, buddy, but don't drop him.
Today's guest.
And today's guest, oh, it's a good one. It's Evan Silva, one of the stalwarts of the fantasy industry, somebody everybody reads. Evan, thank you for coming on. How are you?
I'm doing really well, Chris. Thanks for having me on. It was great to have you on my and Ross's show last week. That turned out to be an awesome show, and hopefully I can return the favor.
Oh, I know you will. Yes, so first of all, if you're not following Evan on Twitter, that's a mistake. He's at Evan Silva, and then he just referred to the podcast that he does with Ross Tucker, who the fans of the little podcast that could know that Ross was on the show last week. And those guys do a weekly Fantasy Feast is the name of the show, and that's a great one to subscribe to as well. So, Evan, I've been haranguing the audience for the first half of the show about super deep sleepers. I'm halfway through the list of super deep sleepers. 8 years in a row, I think, I wrote that column for ESPN, 7 or 8. And now I'm doing it in podcast form. I'm sure all of the guys that I mentioned to you, they're just on the tip of everyone's tongue for fantasy, right?
Right. I mean, yeah, I was, I've been trying to reach for all those guys.
Not so much. But, we service the deeper league player here, and we service the dynasty league player here. So a little bit of content for those guys never hurts. And as I said earlier in the podcast, we're talking about these names not so much that, people in 12-team leagues can add them now, but so that if and when they pop a little bit during the season, hopefully, you and I and the listeners will be clued in and be ready to believe maybe faster than other folks will. So what I asked you to do is kind of piggyback on top of what I've been doing here and come up with some prospects, basically, that you're interested in, that sort of in addition to my list. And the first one that made your list that I wanted to talk about was a Broncos prospect who's not Cody Latimer, but has made some noise as a future possible solution for them, post this current generation, and that's Jordan Taylor. Tell me a little bit about what you think about Taylor.
Well, he's big. He's 6'4" and 209 pounds.
Right.
He ran 4.52 before the draft, which is pretty good at that size. 36.5-inch vertical, 10'2" broad jump. I watch all the mainstream guys before the draft. But sometimes like later in the draft process, I will watch guys who are maybe UDFA types or maybe seventh round projections. And Jordan Taylor came on my radar. I watched him. I watched a couple games of him at Rice before the draft, and he showed a my ball mentality. He plays big. I mean, he plays to his size. He'll go up and get it. I was impressed with him, and I was a little surprised they didn't go in the 7th round. But then the Broncos gave him a pretty good signing bonus as a UDFA, a $7,500 signing bonus, which is toward the higher end of UDFA signing bonuses, and he tore up the spring.
Yeah.
And there were a bunch of articles on how he was doing. Now, he doesn't have a catch yet in the preseason, and he probably won't get one in the 3rd game, but I'm going to be keeping an eye on him in the 4th game. I think he's a prime practice squad candidate in a good offense.
I like it. They call him Sunshine, right?
Yep.
Yeah, because he
got that long hair.
Yeah,
right?
that California looking hair. I like it. A practice squad guy who, let's face it, he's not a factor unless there's an injury, but neither are any of these guys. That's the point, is that these guys are factors if and when, okay, we need to go get a flanker. And Peyton Manning is familiar with him, and that winds up being an interesting solution. I like it a lot.
Or he could go on the Broncos practice squad, and a team like the Panthers could sign him off the practice squad. You never know.
That's a great point. So, yeah, if you see Jordan Taylor, I think every receiver could probably be linked to the Panthers right now, right? If Stephen Hill had stayed healthy, they'd probably, they'd have held on to him, and we'd be, can you imagine an alternate universe where we're having to, pump up Stephen Hill again?
I know that the fantasy douche still pumps up Stephen Hill every day on Twitter. So.
But I think that's done for contrarian reasons, Evan. I'm fairly certain. That's the free Darko movement of the fantasy football.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about a kid who wound up on the Panthers, a tight end named Brandon Williams.
Yeah, and speaking of the Panthers and their wide receiver deficiency, the stories coming out of Charlotte right now are that they're going to become a 2 tight end team. And so therefore they're going to reduce the amount of wide receivers that they have to put on the field.
Yeah.
And right now the top 2 tight ends in Carolina, of course, are Greg Olsen and Ed Dickson. Brandon Williams is just coming back from groin surgery, and he's going to have to work his way up on limited practice time. But he's a freak athlete, man. He's 6'3", 248, 10'8" broad jump coming out of college, which is just absurd. Ran 4.56 with a 36-inch vertical. Last preseason had 2 catches of 30-plus yards. And I looked at his charts on Pro Football Focus. They loved him as a blocker last preseason. He didn't get a whole lot of snaps during the year, was just sprinkled in here and there, played some special teams, and he turns 28 in November. He's a guy who's been around for a long time, played some hoops in college. But, the Panthers need weapons, and Brandon Williams has the athleticism and the size and perhaps the opportunity to become a weapon for them as the season moves along.
I like it. It's a really good call, especially because how many years in a row do we need Ed Dickson to be sort of in the way of someone else? I mean, that kid just never really worked out as an offensive weapon. Okay blocker, but I think you're absolutely right. That's a team that actually could very much use Williams right away if he were healthy enough, because they need playmakers, and we know that Dixon's not a playmaker. Yeah, I think that's a really good one. I mean, we think he's probably making that team unless he goes on IR, right?
Yeah, they just need weapons, and he at least has the potential to be a weapon for them. So he actually came back practicing today, so he'll get to show for the next few weeks whether he deserves a spot.
Yeah. So I mean, that would be better for fantasy if Ed Dickson was no longer in the way, because he's been in the way a bunch in his NFL career, and so I earlier in the show the guy who I led off with was a different tight end, and he wound up in Washington via a trade. I talked about Derek Carrier already in the show. Do you have any thoughts about sort of bringing up Williams? Kind of put me in the mind of Carrier, same kind of situation where they could probably use some weapons, a really, really good athlete winding up as a number, there's tight end, he's there for tight end depth, but, Jordan Reed could get hurt. Do you have any interest in Carrier as a super deep?
I do.
Yeah.
The Redskins gave up some, meaningful compensation to get Derek Carrier. Derek Carrier is 3 years younger than Brandon Williams, and I would say is probably in a better spot. So, yeah, I mean, if I was going to rank them, I would definitely go with Derek Carrier above Brandon Williams.
Yeah, and I mean, I stole him from you.
Right.
I gave you a list, right, and it said you can't have these guys. These guys are my guys. So you were hamstrung by me. It's what I do. I bring people on the show to look bad. I will look smarter than everyone. That's impossible. That's not true at all. So the Jets, they've been riding the Jeremy Curley slot receiver train for enough years, I think. I'm going to guess that you're not all that into Curley, given who the super deep player on your list is.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just the fact of the matter that Quincy Enunwa has been running ahead of Jeremy Curley.
Yeah.
The Jets are looking at Enunwa as a guy who is going to play a role in their offense. Chan Gailey, and I've been watching their preseason games, and Chan Gailey has still been doing this. Chan Gailey runs 4 and 5 wide receiver sets.
Yeah.
I mean, the last time when he was in Buffalo, they would use big slot receivers like David Nelson, had a season with over 50 catches. And Quincy Enunwa is 6'2", 225, ran 4.45 coming out of Nebraska. As a senior at Nebraska, he had 12 touchdowns. That was in a run-heavy offense. So has shown some red zone ability. He was a 6th-round pick last year. He earned a late-season call-up from the practice squad. And right now the Jets are searching for guys behind Marshall and Decker to play in that big spread offense. And Devin Smith is currently on the shelf. Looks like he won't be ready for week 1 after fracturing his collarbone. And the Jets do seem down on not only Jeremy Curley, but Jason Morrow, who would probably play slot receiver essentially in that offense. So Quincy Enunwa is probably, I mean, there's a reasonable chance that when the Jets play their first snap of the 2015 season, Quincy Enunwa is on the field.
See, now I say that I set you up to look worse than me, but that's a really great pick and probably better than I think every wide receiver pick I made. I mean, it's smart because I love the idea of the bigger slot receiver in an offense that needs the quarterback to be able to be helped closer to the line of scrimmage. I mean, the last thing the Jets need, whether it's Geno Smith or Ryan Fitzpatrick, the last thing they need is a bunch of deep throws. They need to, I know they're going to go spread, but they need to go spread and quick. And
yeah.
If Enunwa can be an end zone weapon, I mean that's super smart. We should spell it so people who are looking up in their league, it's ENUNWA. Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Good one. I mean, I'm not happy that it was a good one because it's, again, you didn't have your pick of the top 10 guys and you're still doing better than I am. So it's not that cool. Evan, maybe you could back off on this last one. Actually, not. I get 2 more. Travis Kelce, big name in Kansas City, and I have him as my number 3 tight end. Andy Behrens of Yahoo has been on this air and been very skeptical of Kelce as any kind of upside. He doesn't see it, and I think you like Kelce just fine, having looked at your ratings. But interesting to think about James O'Shaughnessy as a prospect in that Kansas City offense.
For sure, and he's 6'4", 248, ran 4.68 coming out of Illinois State, 35-inch vertical. So he's an above-average athlete at worst, probably a good athlete. He scored 9 touchdowns on only 29 receptions as a senior at Illinois State. This is one of those late-round picks that I didn't get a chance to watch before the draft. The only way that I had heard of him is because Matt Waldman had mentioned him. And Matt Waldman is a guy who I pay attention to his evaluations because he's very, very good, and he watches guys like this who play at Illinois State. And I go to the first Chiefs preseason game.
And there he is.
James O'Shaughnessy is running with the first team offense.
Yeah.
In like the old Kelce role. Kelce has been promoted with Fasano out of the way. Kelce is now a full-time player. James O'Shaughnessy is in the old Travis Kelce role, which really was supposed to go to Demetrius Harris, but he has had recurring foot fractures and I don't even think he's practicing. So O'Shaughnessy is going to open the season as the Chiefs' number 2 tight end. Hopefully Travis Kelce does not get hurt, but if he does, James O'Shaughnessy could be a streamer as early as this season. Travis Kelce's a beast, but he also did miss all of his rookie season with microfracture surgery. So he's got some injury history. James O'Shaughnessy is going to be on the field a lot, probably as a rookie. Keep that name filed away.
Love it. That's exactly the purpose. We're not drafting O'Shaughnessy probably even in a deep dynasty league, but be ready to pounce if Kelce gets hurt. And I'm glad for the name drop of Matt Waldman. He will be on the show 1 week from today on September 3rd. He will be on, and I agree, his stuff is fantastic. I wanted to ask you about one more guy who is a bit more of a known name, but felt like he was going to be an afterthought in Miami after the draft because everyone fell in love with Jay Ajayi, and Ajayi really hasn't made much of a noise in training camp. He's been hurt some, and he's been ineffective some. And so Damian Williams, a kid out of Oklahoma who probably would have been drafted higher than he was if it hadn't – actually, I don't think he was drafted, right? If he hadn't had some off-field problems. You find him to be a little bit interesting behind Lamar Miller this year?
Yes, and another guy who has really good measurables, really good athleticism. I remember watching him coming out of Oklahoma, and I wasn't really impressed with him. But he earned playing time as an undrafted rookie. And he played a lot in passing situations, caught a bunch of passes. His yards per carry was not great, but he was an undrafted rookie. And this preseason, he's blown away. Well, Michael James just isn't very good.
Yeah.
And like you said, Mike Gillislee isn't very good, and Ajayi has been hurt. And, we're kind of still waiting to see if he's good. We probably thought he was good coming out of Boise State, but since then he hasn't done anything good, so that's concerning.
Yeah.
But Damian Williams is locked in as the number 2 back behind Lamar Miller. And if Lamar Miller goes down in the Dolphins, he's probably going to get 7 to 9 touches in the Dolphins' 3rd preseason game. If he gets hurt on one of those touches, Damian Williams is an every down back in at worst an above average offense, and an offense that I consider to be ascending. I love Damian Williams. He's got feature back size too, and he can play in the passing game, and that's always a good combination.
Yeah, that's a good call. I'm as surprised as anybody that Ajayi hasn't made a dent. You're right, it's been because of injury. I think he had some maybe ball security stuff going on early in camp before he got hurt too. Disappointing for those of us who thought about taking him in rookie drafts for dynasty leagues. And now here comes Damian Williams, a former, pretty big name recruit who went to Oklahoma and, would have been drafted if he hadn't had the off-field stuff. And I think I guess I can't be surprised, Evan, when I tout you as knowing your stuff as well as you do, and then you come on and all you do is name 5 incredibly smart, super deep. You haven't done this super deep thing before, have you?
No, I haven't, and it was a little bit of a challenge. You remember I first sent you some guys like Cameron Artis-Payne,
right?
And
I whined,
and Chris was like, "Go deeper," like with exclamation marks.
I whined. It was definitely like the ASCII version of just a flat out whine, and he did. The man came up with the goods. But again, it's not a surprise. Evan, I've been reading you for years. You know your stuff. You are a voice of sobriety in the world of fantasy. People should be following you at EVANSILVA. I'm sure most of our listeners are, but just in case, you should be following Evan. You're really, really good at what you do, my friend.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks so much for having me on, man.
And that's our show. Thank you so much for listening. Remember, the best way to get the little podcast that could right away as soon as it's released is to subscribe. I hope you'll consider doing it. Tomorrow we will continue with our super deep sleeper rundown, and perhaps more importantly, a hungry nation and world clamors for another appearance by Cousin Josh. In fact, he will be on for another Cousin Josh experience. I know you all enjoy that. So I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will talk to you tomorrow. Happy birthday, Dad.
The Harris Football Podcast's opening theme is Under the Gun by Apex Manor. The end theme is Tooth and Claw by OU Villain. Subscribe to the Harris Football Podcast on iTunes and never miss an episode.